Hi, I'm Quinn Reynolds. My father didn't even look up when he slid the leather folder across the glass table. Starting next week, Callum takes over, he said, like the decision was carved in stone. I'd been running the company alone for 9 years. Callum had been home exactly 5 days. My mother gave that same proud smile she only ever used for him. No one asked me. No one ever did. I stayed quiet. I reached into my blazer and placed one single red envelope right in front of my brother. Callum rolled his eyes, still smirking, and ripped it open like it was a joke. Then his face froze. The smirk vanished. He stared at the paper, then at me, voice cracking across the room. Sis, are you kidding me? If you want to know exactly what was written in that red envelope, and why my parents and my own brother will never speak to me again, stay until the very last second. Smash the like button right now so you don't miss the moment the favorite child discovers he just inherited absolutely nothing. Let's start from the beginning. I grew up in Denver, surrounded by rolling backdrops, the sharp smell of fresh marker on whiteboards, and the endless echo of microphones being tested. By the time I was 15, I was already running entire weekend conferences single-handedly. I learned to negotiate with corporate sponsors before I even had a driver's license, figured out how to stretch a catering budget when the headcount jumped overnight, and could smile sweetly at a panicked client while mentally rewriting the entire run of show in my head. My father moved through those venues like he owned the air itself, shaking hands with CEOs, laughing loud enough for the whole room to hear. I stayed 3 steps behind him, arms loaded with extension cords, floor plans, and backup batteries, making sure nothing fell apart. Callum never had to stay 3 steps behind anyone. When he was 8, my parents put him on a plane to Switzerland for exclusive ski school. They posted pictures of him in $1,000 goggles against snow-covered peaks, with captions like "Future Leader in the Making" and "Reynolds' Legacy Continues." Those posts racked up hundreds of likes in hours. I sometimes appeared in the far corner of family photos taken at our annual holiday gala, half out of frame, holding a clipboard, eyes fixed on the floor while someone else posed in the spotlight. The division started long before that, though. Callum got private tutors the moment he sighed about homework. He got week-long trips to Disney World whenever school felt hard. He got the newest gaming console on release day without having to ask twice. I got told I was so independent every time I wanted something normal kids wanted. Independence wasn't a compliment. It was their way of saying they didn't have time for me. When Callum brought home a B-, my mother spent 3 hours on the phone finding him a new tutor. When I brought home straight A's, my father glanced at the report card, nodded once, and said, "That's what we expect from you," before turning back to his laptop. I still remember his 10th birthday. They shut down the entire rooftop of the Brown Palace Hotel, flew in a DJ from Los Angeles, had an ice sculpture carved with his initials glowing blue under the lights. 200 guests, champagne towers, fireworks over downtown. My 16th birthday came 3 months later. They left a grocery store sheet cake on the kitchen counter with a sticky note that read, "Happy 16th. Lock up after your shift tonight." I worked that shift. The tech summit ran late and someone had to stay behind to count chairs and sign off on vendor invoices. I never resented Callum back then. He didn't write the rules. He just grew up inside them like they were gravity. But I learned fast that needing anything made me the problem child, the difficult one, the one who should already know how things worked. So I stopped needing. I became the kid who fixed disasters before anyone noticed they were happening, who could set up a 500-person gala and tear it down again without ever raising my voice. Being useful became my entire identity, because praise was never on the table. My parents told everyone who would listen how charismatic Callum was, how he could charm an entire room at 8 years old, how he was destined to take the company global one day. They never once bragged about me to clients or friends. They didn't have to. I was the one who made sure the contracts were signed, the deposits cleared, the clients rebooked year after year. I was reliable. Reliable doesn't get framed photos on the wall. By 17, I was already managing vendors my father used to handle himself. I knew which florist tried to swap premium roses for cheap ones, which lighting crews showed up late every single time, which hotel director would knock 10% off the final bill if I remembered her daughter's dance recital was that weekend. Callum was somewhere in Europe posting photos with captions written in perfect French. My mother left heart eyes emojis on every single one. I didn't keep count of the nights I fell asleep at the office or the weekends I never had. I told myself it was temporary, that once the company was stable, they would finally see who had really been keeping it alive. I wore exhaustion like a badge, convinced it would be worth it in the end. They never looked up long enough to notice. Instead, they kept building their dreams around the son who wasn't there, planning a future for a ghost, while the daughter who showed up every single day slowly disappeared into the scenery like another piece of rented furniture. That was the first real fracture. Silent. Invisible. Impossible to repair once it ran all the way through. The night my father collapsed in the main convention hall, I was only 22. We were hosting the biggest tech summit of the year. 800 attendees, keynote speakers flown in from Silicon Valley, live broadcast to 3 continents. I was running between the control room and the stage when someone screamed. I pushed through the crowd and found him on the marble floor, one hand clutching his chest, face turning gray. The ambulance ride is still a blur. I remember gripping his hand while the paramedics worked the siren screaming above us the whole way to Denver Health. Doctors said massive stroke. He survived, but the damage was done. Speech slurred, right side partially paralyzed, no chance of returning to 60-hour weeks. My mother crumbled the moment she heard. Within days, she was on heavy medication for anxiety and barely left the house. Overnight, the company that had been our family's pride suddenly had no one at the helm. At 3 a.m, still wearing the same blazer from the summit, I sat in a plastic hospital chair and signed the durable power of attorney they slid across the table. My mother's hand shook too hard to hold the pen. My father couldn't speak yet, just managed a weak nod. The lawyer told me it was temporary until my father recovered. I signed anyway. Someone had to keep the lights on. The next 9 years became my entire life. We were 6 weeks from bankruptcy the first time. Vendors threatening lawsuits, 2 major clients pulling out because they didn't trust a 22-year-old to deliver. I worked 18-hour days, renegotiated every contract, personally called every sponsor and promised them the world. I learned to read balance sheets at 2 a.m. with coffee going cold beside me. I laid off people I'd known since childhood and then cried in the stairwell so no one would see. We survived by a thread. 2 years later, the pandemic hit. Conferences banned overnight. Revenue dropped 90% in a single month. I pivoted us to virtual events before most people knew what Zoom was, built an entire streaming division from scratch, convinced terrified clients to trust us with their biggest product launches. I took no salary for 14 months, so we could keep the core team. When the world reopened, those same clients came back begging for hybrid events. We didn't just survive, we became the go-to company on the entire West Coast. I signed contracts worth 8 figures sitting in my car outside the hospital during my father's physical therapy sessions. I closed deals from the hallway while my mother had panic attacks in the waiting room. I aged a decade in 3 years. Callum came home exactly 4 times during those 9 years. Each visit lasted less than a week. He'd walk through the venues like a tourist, take selfies in front of our new branding, tell the staff how excited he was to finally get started when he finished his master's abroad. Once over family dinner, he looked at me across the table and said with a grin, "Don't worry, sis. When Dad's better, I'll take all this off your hands. You've earned a break." My mother beamed. My father's speech, still slow, managed to pat his arm and say, "That's my boy." I smiled, nodded, and went back to the office to finish payroll. As my parents slowly recovered, they withdrew more and more from daily operations. My father could walk again with a cane, my mother managed her medication. They started traveling short trips at first, then longer ones. They stopped asking for financial reports. They stopped coming to the big events I produced. Instead, they hosted small dinners for old friends and talked endlessly about the day Callum would step up. Every conversation circled back to the same fantasy, their golden son sweeping in to lead the empire. They never once asked if I wanted the job. They never once acknowledged that the empire only still existed because I had dragged it back from the grave twice with my own hands. I told myself it didn't matter. The company was healthy, employees had jobs, clients were happy. I had built something unbreakable. When the time came, surely they would see the truth. They didn't. Instead, they started planning the transition in earnest, scheduling meetings. I wasn't invited to drafting announcements with Callum's name in bold letters. My mother began introducing him to longtime clients as the future of Reynolds events. My father practiced speeches about legacy and handing the reins to the next generation. 9 years of my life poured into every brick, every contract, every sleepless night, and they were getting ready to hand it all to the son who had never once stayed late to strike a set. I kept showing up. I kept signing the checks, closing the deals, keeping the machine running. But something inside me finally went very quiet. The girl who used to believe hard work would eventually be seen stopped believing. One morning, I opened the internal email and saw my name crossed off the board list in red. The subject line was simple: Executive Transition Update, effective Q3. I clicked before my second sip of coffee. The memo announced that Callum Reynolds had been unanimously approved as CEO in waiting. My title was now listed as Interim Operations Director. Interim. After everything. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. No meeting, no discussion, no courtesy call. Just a company-wide email telling 200 employees that the future had already been decided. I closed the laptop, walked to the glass wall of my office, and looked down at the main hall. The banners from last year's Global Leadership Summit still hung there, deep blue with my exact color palette. The tagline I wrote at 3 a.m. when the client changed their mind for the 7th time. My design, my execution, my record-breaking revenue, and now, someone else's victory lap. My assistant knocked and slid a printed packet under the door. "From your parents," she said quietly, then disappeared. I knew what it was before I opened it. Callum's 5-year vision for Reynolds events, 47 pages of handwritten notes scanned into a deck. Bullet points in Comic Sans, numbers that didn't add up. He had projected $28 million in prepaid deposits that didn't exist, money he thought we could just move around from future bookings. He'd double-booked our flagship venue for 3 separate Fortune 100 clients on the same weekend and marked it as creative overlapping revenue. The margins were fantasy. The risk exposure was catastrophic. At the bottom of the last page, in my mother's neat signature and my father's shaky one, was the word approved. I sat down hard in my chair. The leather creaked like it was laughing at me. I pulled up the shared drive and started clicking through folders I hadn't opened in months. Board minutes I was no longer invited to. Budget revisions I'd never seen. An entire marketing campaign built around Callum's face, new headshots taken in front of our venue's taglines about the next generation of leadership. They had already ordered the banners. They were scheduled to go up next week. I found the new org chart. My name was a tiny box at the bottom, reporting to a position labeled Chief Visionary Officer, C. Reynolds. My direct reports had been reassigned. My budget authority revoked. My email signature automatically updated overnight to remove the word President. I walked to the window again. Down in the hall, the maintenance crew was already taking down my banners to make room for the new ones. I watched them roll the fabric like they were erasing the last 9 years, one strip at a time. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes. Hours. The sun climbed higher and poured across the empty conference tables below. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother sweetheart: "We're announcing Callum at the gala next month. We know you'll make the transition smooth. Love you." 3 heart emojis, like punctuation. Something inside me finally snapped, not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, cold break. I opened the bottom drawer, took out my personal laptop, and booked an appointment with a law firm I'd never used before. Downtown, 18th floor, discreet. Then I walked through the office one last time. Past the photos on the wall where I was cropped out of every frame. Past the awards with my name engraved so small you had to squint. Past the employees who looked away because they already knew. I stopped at the light switch by the door. The room was exactly as I'd left it the night I pulled an all-nighter to save the company one more time. Coffee cup still on the desk. Sticky notes still in my handwriting. The air still smelled like my perfume. I turned off the lights. The click echoed. "No," I whispered to the empty office. "Not this time." I walked out and didn't look back. The next morning, I was already sitting in Roland Whitaker's downtown Denver office before the city woke up. He closed the door, poured 2 coffees, and listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. When I finished, he leaned back and said only 4 words. "We can protect you." Then he called in his sister Arden Whitaker, the best estate and corporate attorney in the Rocky Mountains. By noon, we had a plan. We built the Evergreen Summit Irrevocable Trust from the ground up. Irrevocable meant once assets went in, they could never come out no matter who screamed later. We paired it with a separate LLC that would own every intangible piece of the business. The booking software I'd paid millions to develop, the master vendor database, the proprietary pricing algorithm, the exclusive partnership agreements with 200 Fortune 500 clients, the curated VIP list worth more than the buildings themselves, every standard operating procedure that turned chaos into 5-star execution. The venues could stay in the family name, but without those pieces, the company would be an empty shell. The work took 24 months of absolute secrecy. I flew to Roland's office on random Tuesdays, used burner phones, encrypted drives, fake calendar entries that said dentist or hair appointment. Arden drafted hundreds of pages of documents designed to look boring on purpose, tax optimization addendums, holding company restructurings, IP assignment agreements buried inside larger estate planning packets. Every quarter, I brought my parents another thick stack of papers. I scheduled the signings for days when my father was tired after physical therapy, and my mother was distracted by charity luncheons. I stood beside them, smiling pen in hand, and said things like, "This just moves some intellectual property into a lower tax bracket, or purely administrative, helps with estate taxes down the line." They trusted me completely. They always had when it came to paperwork. They flipped to the signature pages, scrawled their names, and handed the folders back without reading past the cover sheet. I watched them sign away the real company one autograph at a time. We moved the booking platform first. I paid an outside developer under a fake consulting contract to duplicate the entire system, then flipped the switch so the live site pulled data from the new servers owned by the trust. Clients never noticed. Next came the master contracts. I renegotiated every long-term deal with an addendum that assigned future renewals to the LLC. Legal, quiet, invisible. The VIP list went into an encrypted database accessible only by trust-authorized keys. The standard operating procedures, every checklist, every timeline template, every crisis playbook I'd written at 3 a.m. over 9 years were copyrighted and transferred. Even the custom lighting plots and stage designs were registered as intellectual property under the new entity. Arden filed everything in Delaware for maximum privacy, backdated certain transfers so they looked routine, and nested the ownership 3 layers deep. By the time we finished, the 4 physical venues were all my parents technically still owned, but they were worthless without the oxygen only I controlled. Roland kept saying, "This is the cleanest protective structure I've ever built in 30 years. Arden added, "And the most ruthless." I didn't argue with either description. I paid their fees out of my personal savings money I'd never spent on vacations or clothes, because every extra dollar had always gone back into the company. It hurt to watch the account balance drop. but not as much as the alternative. The last document was signed 6 weeks before the gala. My mother complained the packet was heavier than usual. I told her it included updated insurance riders. She laughed, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're such a good daughter, always taking care of the boring stuff." My father patted my hand and told me I worried too much. They both signed in blue ink while talking about the custom tuxedo they were having made for Callum. I took the folders, slid them into my briefcase, and drove straight to Roland's office for final notarization. When the last stamp hit the page, Arden looked up from the table and said quietly, "It's done. No one can touch this now. Not a court, not a creditor, not family." Roland poured 3 small glasses of bourbon even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. We didn't toast. We just drank. I walked out of that building lighter than I'd felt in years. The buildings could keep their name. The letterhead could stay the same. But the heart of the company, every beat that actually made money, now belonged to a trust that answered only to me. And nobody, not even the people who raised me, had the slightest idea. The night before the gala, I sat alone on the rooftop of the main convention center, the city lights glittering below like scattered diamonds. 500 guests would arrive tomorrow. Black ties, champagne, a string quartet, the whole performance. My parents had spent months planning every detail of Callum's coronation. I had spent the same months making sure the stage was set for something else entirely. I walked back down to my office long after midnight. The building was silent except for the low hum of the air system. I locked the door behind me, turned on only the small desk lamp, and took out a single sheet of heavy cream stationery and a red envelope. I wrote the letter by hand. No greeting. No dear Callum. Just facts. You are about to be named CEO of Reynolds Events. You will receive 4 beautiful venues with marble lobbies and panoramic views. You will also receive $42 million in bank debt and vendor obligations. Every major contract, every recurring client, every booking system, every exclusive partnership now requires the countersignature of the Evergreen Summit Trust. The sole authorized signatory of that trust is me. Without my signature, no deposit can be accepted, no contract can be renewed, no event can be confirmed. The buildings will stand empty. Enjoy your new title. I signed my name at the bottom in black ink. 1 line. No love, no regards, no explanation. Just Quinn Reynolds in the same handwriting they had seen on 1,000 contracts they never bothered to read. I read it once more, folded the paper into perfect thirds, and slid it into the red envelope. I pressed the seal closed with my thumb until the wax cooled. Then I placed the envelope in the exact center of my desk, perfectly parallel to the edges, the way I aligned every stage plot for the last 9 years. I looked around the office one last time. The framed industry awards on the wall, the stack of industry magazines with my anonymous case studies inside. The emergency kit I kept in the cabinet for every gala, spare heels, sewing kit, antacids, and a flashlight. All of it would stay behind tomorrow. I took nothing personal except my laptop and the red envelope. I turned off the lamp. The room dropped into darkness, the city glow through the glass, the only light left. I stood there for a long moment listening to the quiet. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was finished. Tomorrow they would hand Callum the keys to a kingdom that no longer existed. They would smile for the same proud smiles they had smiled since he was 8 years old. They would clap when he walked across the stage in the tuxedo they paid for. They would toast the future, and when the applause died down, I would give him the envelope. I picked up my coat, left the red rectangle alone under the faint city light, and walked out. The click of the door locking behind me sounded final. The gala night arrived, chandelier light pouring over 500 corporate guests in black tie and diamonds. The grand ballroom had been transformed into a palace of glass and gold. 30-foot floral arches framed the entrance. Ice sculptures of the company logo glowed under colored spotlights. A live string quartet played from the marble mezzanine, and champagne towers rose 6 tiers high beside every bar. Every detail screamed triumph, legacy, coronation. My parents had spent a year planning the perfect stage for their chosen son. I stood near the back wall in a simple black silk gown, almost invisible among the sequins and tuxedos. I watched them work the crowd like royalty. My father, in his first formal tuxedo since the stroke, moved slowly but proudly with his cane, shaking hands with board members and longtime clients. My mother shimmered in floor-length silver, beaming each time she introduced our son Callum, the future of Reynolds Events. Callum floated from table to table, laughing too loudly, gripping shoulders too tightly, already wearing the crown they had polished for him since childhood. Dinner ended. The lights dimmed to a warm gold. A single spotlight hit the elevated stage. My father walked up first. He placed both hands on the podium, smiled the smile I hadn't seen in 9 years, and began. Tonight is not just a celebration. Tonight is about family, about vision, about handing the torch to the next generation who will carry it even higher. Polite applause rippled through the room. He spoke for 12 full minutes. Every milestone of the company somehow became evidence of Callum's destiny. The pandemic pivot. A challenge Callum would have crushed. The 8-figure contracts. The kind of deals he was born to close. My name was never mentioned. Not once. My mother stood beside him, eyes glassy with pride, one hand resting on Callum's arm like she was presenting a priceless statue. Finally, my father raised his glass. It is my greatest honor to announce that effective this moment, Callum Reynolds is the new Chief Executive Officer of Reynolds Events. The room exploded. Standing ovation, thunderous applause, cameras flashed like lightning. Callum strode forward, arms wide, soaking it in. He hugged my father hard, kissed my mother's cheek, then turned to the crowd with both thumbs up like a rock star. The noise swelled again. I waited until it peaked, then started walking. My heels made no sound on the marble. Guests parted instinctively. Conversations died mid-sentence. I climbed the 3 shallow steps to the stage and stopped directly in front of my brother. The applause faltered into confused silence. Callum's grin flickered. He still expected the scripted sisterly hug, the supportive smile for the cameras. I opened my small clutch, withdrew one single red envelope, nothing else, and placed it in the exact center of the long glass head table. 500 pairs of eyes locked on that red rectangle. Callum forced a laugh. "What's this, sissay? Congratulations card with $1 million bonus inside." He tore the seal, unfolded the cream stationery, and began to read. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. His shoulders jerked like he'd been punched. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then it did. "Are you kidding me?" The raw scream ricocheted off the crystal chandeliers, amplified by every microphone in the room. Someone in the front row dropped a champagne flute. It shattered like a gunshot. My father stepped forward, face suddenly ashen. "Quinn, what is the meaning of this, public?" A calm voice cut through the chaos. "If I may." A tall man in a midnight blue suit rose smoothly from table 3. Fairchild Thorne, trustee and lead counsel to the Evergreen Summit Trust, had been on the guest list for months as a courtesy to the legal community. No one had thought twice about it. He did not raise his voice yet. Every word carried. For the record and for the benefit of everyone present, every intangible asset of Reynolds Events, including but not limited to the proprietary booking platform, all master client contracts, intellectual property portfolio, exclusive vendor agreements, recurring revenue streams, and operational systems, was irrevocably transferred to the Evergreen Summit Irrevocable Trust 2 years ago. Those transfers were executed with the full signatures of Seth Reynolds and Stacy Reynolds on multiple occasions. The 4 physical venues remain titled to the original corporation, along with all associated debt liabilities and ongoing obligations. The operating company effective tonight has no revenue-generating capability without the trust's written authorization. The silence was so complete I could hear my mother's sharp inhale. Fairchild Thorne continued unruffled. Ms. Quinn Reynolds is the sole authorized signatory of the Evergreen Summit Trust. No event may be booked, no deposit accepted, no contract renewed without her personal signature. The law is clear, the documents are filed, and the structure is irreversible. Callum's hand shook so violently the letter fluttered to the floor. This is fraud. You can't. It is not fraud, Fairchild, Thorne said quietly. It is meticulous compliance. My father's face turned the color of old paper. He reached blindly for the podium. The heavy microphone slipped from his fingers and hit the wooden stage with a deafening metallic boom that rolled through every speaker in the hall like thunder. My mother made a small broken animal sound and clutched Callum's sleeve. 500 guests sat frozen. Phones were already up, red recording lights glowing everywhere. No one dared breathe. I looked at my brother, then at my parents, and spoke the only words I would say all night. I built it. I saved it. I protected it. Enjoy the view from the empty buildings. Then I turned, walked down the steps, and left the stage. The ballroom stayed silent the entire time. 6 months later, I stood on the rooftop of the newest center in Seattle, watching the sun drop behind the Olympics while the city lights blinked awake below. The building beneath my feet was the 11th under the Evergreen Summit brand. 11 centers across 6 states, every single one booked solid 18 months out. Revenue had tripled in half a year. The waiting list for Fortune 500 clients stretched into 2028. We had just broken ground on number 12 in Austin, and were already negotiating for 2 more in Florida. Every morning, I woke up to new contracts waiting for nothing more than my signature. The old company, the one still carrying the Reynolds name, was a ghost. Within 8 weeks of the gala, the banks called every note. Callum had no incoming cash flow to service the debt. He sold the original flagship downtown Denver venue first, then the Mountain Resort Center in Vail, then the historic hall in Boulder. 3 of the 4 buildings gone within 5 months. The last one, the very first venue my parents ever bought, sits half empty now, hosting occasional bar mitzvahs and the odd trade show nobody else wanted. The marble lobbies echo. The chandeliers stay dark most nights. My parents moved out of the house on Cherry Creek and into a 2-bedroom rental 20 miles outside the city. No more gated neighborhood, no more housekeeping staff, no more country club membership. My mother sold her jewelry to cover the security deposit. My father's cane now leans against a second-hand couch in a living room that smells faintly of someone else's cooking. They drive a 5-year-old sedan with a dented fender. The license plate still says RENLD1, but the vanity feels hollow now. I know these details because the real estate agent who handled the house sale sent me flowers when the deal closed. She thought I'd want to know. I threw the card away and kept the flowers. Callum lasted 4 months as CEO before the board he never actually controlled forced him out. The LinkedIn update that announced his departure was 3 lines long. He moved to exploring new opportunities. I never saw him post another selfie in a private jet. Not one of them has tried to contact me. No angry emails, no tearful phone calls, no letters begging for forgiveness or threatening lawsuits. Nothing. The silence is absolute, the way only true shame can make it. I still have the same phone number, the same email address, the same apartment downtown. They know exactly where to find me. They choose not to. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if they talk about me at all. If my mother still sets an extra plate at dinner out of habit. If my father stares at the old family photos on the wall and finally sees the daughter who was cut out of every frame. If Callum lies awake replaying that moment the microphone hit the floor. I stopped wondering a long time ago whether I feel sorry for them. The answer never changes. My days are long again, but in a different way now. I fly between cities, walk new rooftops, sign new leases, hire new teams. Every center carries the same clean lines, the same flawless execution, the same five-star reputation, but none of them carry the Reynolds name anymore. Clients don't care what the parent company is called. They care that the stage lights come on exactly when they're supposed to, and the Wi-Fi never drops during a keynote. I give them that, and they pay me very well for it. Last week we hit a milestone the old company never reached in 30 years: $1 billion in forward bookings. The finance team wanted to throw a party. I told them to save the budget for the next expansion. I don't throw parties anymore. I build things. I kept one small reminder. In the bottom drawer of my desk in the Seattle office sits the red envelope still sealed with the same wax now faded. I never opened the original letter again after that night. I don't need to. The words are burned into me like brand. Sometimes new employees ask why the trust has that particular name, Evergreen Summit. I tell them it's because some things are meant to stay green and growing forever, no matter who tries to cut them down. Tonight, the wind off the Sound is cold, but I don't feel it. I look out over the skyline. I earned one contract at a time, one sleepless night at a time, one signature at a time, and I feel something I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. Peace. They got the buildings. I got everything that made the buildings actually needed to make money, and I never looked back. Don't ever hand the life you built to someone who has never once had to pay a single bill on their own.